So let's talk about what we need to put in here to fill in information about some of our main plant systems. I categorize these plant systems into three main concepts based on the standard that we have to meet. The first is transport, which is going to explain how a plant moves water, nutrients, and other materials throughout its systems. The second one is reproduction, basically, of course, how the plant is going to reproduce so we can have more plants. And then the third one is response. What do our plants do to respond to different stimuli, whether those stimuli are external on the outside or internal on the inside? So we're going to start first with transport and a few little details you need to know. We are going to go into greater detail with each of these processes throughout the rest of this week, going into next week. So be on the lookout for that. When we talk about transport, be sure that you know that roots absorb water and nutrients from the soil. Of course, when I say soil, that could mean a variety of things. It could be sand, it could be loamy soil, it could be pebbles. Um, the main point is that the roots will do the absorption and they will send that material through something we call the xylem. The xylem will move that water back and forth throughout the plant. We have two main parts, the xylem and the phloem. You'll see these words come up multiple times. The xylem, its main purpose is to make sure that water gets everywhere that it needs to get to, from the roots all the way to the highest leaf, flower, or fruit. Your phloem will move sugar and other nutrients throughout the plant. So once your plant goes through photosynthesis, the phloem is responsible for moving all that glucose and any other nutrients to any parts of the plant that need it. So you can sort of think of your xylem and phloem as being pretty similar to our circulatory system and the way our blood moves nutrients, oxygen, water throughout our bodies. Leaves also help in transport because they will actually release excess water through a process called transpiration, which is pretty much just a fancy form of evaporation that only plants can use. Um, when plants notice that they are carrying too much water, they just release it back into the atmosphere. Now, in terms of reproduction, there's a few things that are very important for you to know. I've kept this very simple because there, of course, are a lot more details in terms of how plants reproduce. And when speaking of reproduction here, we're focusing mainly on flowering plants. And of course, these are going to be plants that produce a flower and usually a fruit. We're not talking about plants like conifers, think pine trees and how they produce cones, or any other type of plant like a fern, which produces spores. We're looking specifically at flowering plants. Something that you need to keep in mind, pollen is found on the stamen of a flower, and of course, it's transported. We all know that bees, wasps, birds, and other small organisms actually assist in pollen transport, especially transport of pollen from flower to flower. Many of our flowers can actually fertilize themselves. So the pollen just has to move from one spot on the flower to another spot. The pistil is the part of the plant that will house, or the part of the flower, excuse me, that houses the ovule and receives the pollen for fertilization. So whenever you look at a diagram of a flower, you'll notice that inside the pistil is the ovule, and this, of course, is what will eventually become the fertilized seed that will produce another plant. Of course, as I mentioned before, there are some flowers that can fertilize themselves. Good majority of them can, which means that they contain both the male and female parts. There are some that do not. And so, of course, when you're in that situation, you would need to have multiple plants around where one plant can fertilize the other so that way more plants can form. Our final section of these plant systems is plant response. Now, this is when we're going to get into different types of what we call tropism, which is when plants respond to different stimuli. The first is we all know that most plants, if you've ever had house plants, especially plants in pots, you'll notice that a lot of times they'll turn towards the light. That is referred to as phototropism. An easy way to remember that, a photon is a light particle. A photograph is when we take a picture using light. So phototropism is a plant's response to sunlight. And in most cases, plants will turn their leaves towards the sun. Keep in mind, plants are doing this because they're just trying to make photosynthesis happen more efficiently. The less energy the plant has to use to perform photosynthesis, the better it is for the plant. So by turning its leaves towards the light, that aids in photosynthesis happening a little bit faster. The next one is this whole concept that plants just kind of automatically know how to grow along with gravity. You can plant a seed upside down, soil on the top, and try to get the plant to grow on the bottom, but plants are going to grow according to gravity. They're going to want to grow their roots towards the bottom or down and have the rest of the plant go up. This is referred to as gravitropism. It's an automatic response in plants because we all know that water flows from a high elevation to a low elevation and is pulled by gravity also. And so plants are just designed to be able to receive or pull up nutrients and water from some of the lowest points. And so it just automatically knows it needs to grow with gravity. Also, of course, the leaves and other parts of the plant have to be able to receive sunlight in order to perform photosynthesis. Another form of tropism is the fact that we all know there are some plants that just automatically understand how to attach to other plants or even other surfaces. Um, This is called thigmotropism, and it's what vines do. Uh, there's a very common vine out here called greenbrier that can be found everywhere in East Texas. It commonly will grow quite easily and travel up large, tall trees. Um, the vines use other plants to assist them in getting as close to the light as they can. This is an automatic response in some of these plants. Their stems just automatically know to attach to something and either wrap around or coil themselves, however you want to put it, and continue growing upwards. So that is thigmotropism. Of course, we know that plants wilt when they are dehydrated. We'll talk a little more specifically about this, and this gets into what we covered with osmosis and diffusion, hypertonic and hypotonic. It's very similar in plants. When a plant um, does not have enough water, the vacuoles will shrink and it will cause wilting. And of course, we all know that when that is noticeable, we typically water our plants, and then those plants get the water that they need. One more response goes back to what we talked about in transport, and that is that a plant will transpire if they have too much water. So they'll actually release that excess water through the leaves. And again, that process is called transpiration.